Hi, I'm Jeremy, roller coaster engineer. I've answered many questions over the years about my backyard roller coaster. In this video, I'll be answering the question, how did you bend the wood for the track? This is probably the most frequently asked question that I've received over the years, so I thought it might be worthwhile to answer it in a video. Before I began building a section of track, I first needed to complete the support structure beneath. I relied on a solid support structure to give me the ability to bend the rails and hold them firmly into position. Building the supports was quite a project in itself, worthy of a separate video to explain, so for now I'll limit the focus of this video to the bending of the track. As far as track materials, I used pressure-treated southern yellow pine grade number 2 lumber. I used both 1-inch and 2-inch thick lumber, ensuring that it always met the number 2 grading standard. People often assume I must have used some innovative trick to bend the wood. In reality, there was only a very small section of track at the top of the lift hill that required a special trick for bending, but the majority of the track required nothing more than carefully forcing the boards into a formed position using a proper technique and following a set of guidelines that I created for myself. I started by building a couple of 8-foot sections of the bottom layer of track, each consisting of two 2-inch thick rails spaced apart with cross ties. I placed one end of a track section on the tallest support and clamped both rails of that section firmly to the ledger beam with C-clamps. Using my own weight, I forced the other end of the track section down just enough to get the rails within the grasp of fully open C-clamps at the nearest ledger beam. I tightened the C-clamps at the lower end of the track section, drawing and bending the rails toward the ledger beam. Using screws, I attached a connecting board to the end of each rail of the track section, and also attached the next track section to those connecting boards. At this point, with the formed track section clamped down into place, I attached the bent rails to the ledger beams with large screws and then removed the C-clamps. I placed the C-clamps on the nearest ledger beams near the middle of the second track section. I tightened the C-clamps, drawing the middle of the track section down towards the ledger beams, then once again attached the rails to the ledger beams using large screws. I removed the C-clamps and added another joining board for each rail to allow a connection to another track section. At this point, I had completed the most difficult part of the track laying process, which was forming the lower layer of track to the ledger beams. Next, I started adding the second layer of track directly to the rails of the first layer. I was careful to stagger the start point and end point of the second layer so they would not line up with the start and end points of the first layer in order to avoid causing a weak point in the track. Using C-clamps, I was able to draw down the second layer much like I had done for the first layer. I joined the two layers together using several screws along the length of the rails. I continued to add layers in this manner using larger and larger C-clamps and longer screws as required, ensuring that the start and end points of the layers would not line up with any of the layers below. Combined with the bending technique, I also developed a set of guidelines to follow which greatly improved my results. Number 1. Bending fresh lumber. When the lumber leaves the mill, it's still wet inside with a moisture content of around 16 to 19%. Once it's left outside for an extended period, it begins to dry out. As it dries, it gains strength and stiffness, so it was crucial to bend the wood while it was still fresh. Number 2. Carefully selecting lumber. I noticed when boards broke during the bending process, they often cracked near a knot in the wood, especially when it was near the edge. Therefore, I spent a little extra time carefully choosing lumber that had fewer knots near the edges. Number 3. Using long pieces of lumber. I tried to use full 8-foot board lengths whenever possible, which seemed to give me more leverage for bending and resulted in fewer bending operations because there were less boards to bend. Also, longer boards meant there would be fewer cuts and fewer joints between the ends of the boards, which are weak points. Number 4. Using C-clamps. At first I was trying to rush things without having the proper tools. I tried to use my own weight to pull down the boards and had to rely on driving the fasteners in to help cinch down the boards. This didn't work very well and about wore me out in the process. I finally took the time to order some oversized 12-inch and 14-inch C-clamps, which turned out to be absolutely essential. The tightening action of the C-clamps allowed me to slowly draw the boards down, forcing them into position more evenly. Number 5. Allowing adequate edge distance for fasteners. At first I was inserting screws and nails too close to the edges of the board. This would often lead to cracks and splits near the edges, right where the fasteners were placed. So I learned to allow about an inch of edge distance on the sides and about 2 inches of edge distance from the end of each board for each fastener. Well, I hope this video answered the question, how did you bend the wood for the track? I'll be answering more questions by video in the future, so if you have anything you'd like me to cover, please leave a comment on this video or any of my other videos. Thanks for watching, and thank you for subscribing.